She said, "I'm not used to being touched." I said, "Let me remind you how it feels." Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's story, could I ask you for a small favor? Please take a second to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our new stories about love, fate, and second chances. It is quick, free, and truly the best way to help us keep creating heartfelt tales that touch the soul. Your support means more than words can say. And one more thing, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments. We love knowing how far these stories travel. Thank you, from all of us here at Aurea Stories. It was a quiet night in the rehabilitation wing of Street Clare Hospital. The rain outside tapped gently against the tall windows, blurring the orange city lights in the distance. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and chamomile lotion, the kind that Evelyn Hart always used before starting her late shift. Evelyn was a physical therapist, the kind of woman who spoke softly but carried an unspoken strength in every movement. Her patients trusted her because she never forced them. She asked permission before every touch, every stretch, every breath. To her, touch was not routine. It was sacred. That night, a new patient had been transferred into her unit. His name on the clipboard read Julian Reed. The report said he had suffered nerve damage from a car accident and struggled with limited movement in his right arm. Evelyn had no idea who he really was, one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs in the city, a man known for saving others but unable to save himself. When she entered the dimly lit room, Julian was sitting by the window, his shoulder tense, his breathing shallow. The soft glow of the bedside lamp traced the sharp lines of his face, revealing both pride and pain. Evelyn spoke first, her tone calm and professional. "Good evening, Mr. Reed. I am Evelyn, your therapist for tonight. We will start gently, only what you are comfortable with." He looked up, his voice low, almost defensive. "I am not good with being touched." For a second, the words hung between them like fog. Evelyn froze, her gloved hands hovering mid-air. She understood that sentence better than anyone. She had said those same words years ago after a supervisor crossed a line and shattered her trust in human closeness. Since then, every contact had to be controlled, measured, agreed upon. But tonight, something in Julian's eyes, a quiet exhaustion, a plea hidden under layers of pride, made her take a step closer. "I understand," she said softly. "You do not have to be good at it. You just have to breathe." He tried to smile but failed. "That is harder than you think." Evelyn nodded. She placed a small metronome on the bedside table, setting it to a slow, steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. "Let us just follow the sound," she said. "No expectations, just breathing." Minutes passed. The sound of the rain merged with the ticking metronome. She guided his arm with cautious precision, every movement a question silently asked and answered through his breath. When her fingertips finally brushed his skin, she felt his body flinch, but he did not pull away. Her voice was almost a whisper. "See? You are safe. I am right here." He exhaled, shaky but real. It has been a long time since anyone said that. Evelyn smiled faintly, not out of pity but recognition. "Then maybe tonight is a good time to remember what it feels like." The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Yet inside that small hospital room, something fragile began to shift, an invisible wall slowly lowering between two people who had forgotten what gentle really meant. Neither of them knew it then, but this was the beginning of a healing that would test every fear they had ever learned to live with. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving thin streams of water gliding down the hospital window. Evelyn stood by the coffee machine in the staff lounge, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup that had already gone cold. She had barely slept. The image of Julian's eyes from last night stayed in her mind, the mix of pride and vulnerability, like someone trying to remember how to be human again. When she returned to his room for the morning session, he was awake, sitting up, the hospital gown replaced by a loose gray shirt. He looked stronger than he had the night before, though the stiffness in his shoulder betrayed the pain he was hiding. The metronome from last night was still on the table, motionless. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," Evelyn said, keeping her tone calm. "How is your shoulder today?" He looked at her with a faint smile. "Still attached, I think. That is progress, right?" She smiled back, allowing herself a brief moment of warmth before she adjusted her gloves. "Progress is progress. Let us see how the muscles respond today." He nodded, then hesitated. "About last night," he said, his voice quieter. "Thank you for staying patient. I know I am not the easiest person to work with. Evelyn set down her clipboard. You were fine. Healing takes more than medicine. Sometimes it takes permission. Permission? He asked. To be touched, she said softly. To be seen. To be helped. For a moment, silence filled the room again. The steady hum of the hospital air conditioning was the only sound. Then Julian exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if letting go of something heavy. All right, he said finally. Then I give you permission. Evelyn guided him through a series of light stretches, each movement precise. She noticed how he flinched less this time, how his breathing synced with the faint tick of the metronome when she turned it on again. The sound created rhythm in the room, a reminder that progress often begins with something small and steady. Do you ever get tired of this job? He asked after a while, his tone curious, not mocking. Every day, she answered honestly. But then I remember why I started. My mother used to say that people forget the value of touch until they lose it. That is why I stayed. Julian looked at her, studying the faint tiredness behind her steady gaze. You talk like someone who lost it once. Evelyn paused for a second, her gloved hands still resting gently near his shoulder. Maybe I did, she said, almost whispering. Then she forced a small smile and changed the subject. Try raising your arm again, slowly. He followed her lead, and for the first time his arm lifted without trembling. His expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. That is the first time it did not hurt. Evelyn nodded. Your body remembers safety when it is treated with care. That is how the nervous system works. He held her gaze, the air between them charged with something quiet but real. And what about you, Evelyn? Do you remember what safety feels like? Her throat tightened. She looked down, pretending to adjust the strap on his sling. I am still learning, she said. By the end of the session, the room had softened. Julian sat by the window again, staring at the slow morning light spilling across the floor. Evelyn gathered her notes, ready to move to her next patient, but he spoke before she reached the door. You said healing takes permission, he began. Does that mean you decide when it starts? She turned, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. No, healing starts when you decide to stop fighting it. Julian nodded thoughtfully, his eyes following her as she stepped out of the room. When the door closed, he looked at the small metronome still ticking on the table. Its rhythm reminded him of something he had not felt in months' hope. That night, Evelyn stayed late again. She was writing notes at the nurse's station when she heard the echo of footsteps approaching. She looked up and found Julian standing there, wearing a hospital robe draped over his shoulders and holding the metronome in his hand. I could not sleep, he said simply. The sound stopped. It felt wrong. Evelyn hesitated, then motioned for him to sit nearby. Machines stop when they are not wounded, she said. It is easy to forget they need care too. He watched her twist the small key on the back of the metronome, setting it ticking again. Maybe people are not so different, he said quietly. We all need someone to remind us to keep moving. For the first time, Evelyn laughed softly, the kind of laugh that surprised even her. Maybe, she replied. Just promise me you will not escape from your room again. He lifted a hand in mock surrender. Scout's honor. Their laughter faded into the calm hum of the night. Outside, the rain had started again, gentle and rhythmic, almost like the ticking of the metronome, almost like two hearts learning to beat in the same rhythm again. Neither of them said it aloud, but both knew. Something had begun to change. It was not love yet. It was not trust yet. But it was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings are enough. By the third week, the hospital corridors had begun to feel strangely familiar to Julian. The sterile scent of disinfectant, the muted chatter of nurses at dawn, even the low hum of fluorescent lights above each sound, had become part of his new rhythm. What had once felt like confinement now felt like refuge. Evelyn noticed the change before he did. He walked with more balance, his breathing steadier, his shoulders less guarded. Yet something in his expression remained unresolved, a tension behind the calm. She saw it every time he paused before she touched him, as if his body had learned to relax, but his heart had not caught up yet. One morning, as she checked his progress chart, she said, Your recovery is remarkable, Mr. Reed. You might be ready for discharge soon. He looked up from the chair by the window. That sounds like good news, but it feels strange. I am not sure I am ready to leave yet. People rarely are, Evelyn replied, setting her clipboard down. Healing does not end when you walk out of a building. Sometimes that is when it truly begins. Julian gave a small, thoughtful smile. You talk like someone who has been through this herself. She looked at him carefully, unsure how much to share. I suppose we all carry injuries that do not show up on X-rays. The air between them grew quiet again. Outside, sunlight flickered through the blinds, striping the floor in gold. Julian finally said, "Then maybe we can help each other heal." Evelyn did not respond right away. She turned to adjust the strap on his arm brace, but her voice softened when she spoke. "I am here to help you recover, Julian. That is all." He heard the hesitation in her tone. "Is that all?" he asked gently. Her eyes lifted to his, startled by how direct he sounded. For a brief second, the air seemed to hold its breath. Then she stepped back, returning to her calm, professional distance. "It has to be," she said quietly. Later that afternoon, while preparing new therapy notes, Evelyn overheard two nurses whispering near the front desk. "Did you hear? That patient, Julian Reed, he is not just anyone. The man owns half of Reed Biomedical. His company funds half this wing." Evelyn froze. The words hit harder than she expected. She turned away quickly before anyone could see her reaction. The man who had sat quietly in her therapy room every day, who had shared his fears about touch and trust, was the same man whose name hung on the plaque outside the hospital's main entrance. When she entered his room later, Julian could tell something had shifted. "You heard? Did you not?" he asked quietly. She stood by the door, her gloves still in her hands. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because I wanted to be treated like everyone else," he said simply. "Not as a name on a building. I needed to remember what it felt like to be human, not a headline." Her voice trembled slightly. "You think hiding the truth makes you more human? You made me believe we were equals, Julian, that we understood each other." "We do," he insisted, standing slowly. "Everything I said, everything we shared, it was real." Evelyn shook her head. "You had the power to walk away from this place any time. I did not. You will heal and return to your world. I will stay here counting hours and heartbeats that do not belong to me." She turned to leave, but he stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. "Evelyn, please. I never wanted to hurt you." She looked back at him, her eyes shining but firm. "Then do not pretend that what we built in that room was equal. You have your world, Julian. I have mine." The sound of the rain outside had returned, soft but insistent. Julian stood there, silent, as she walked out of the room. For the first time since his accident, he felt the sharp pain of losing something that medicine could not fix. That night, he could not sleep. The metronome sat still on his bedside table, unwound, its silence louder than any ticking could ever be. He stared at it for hours, remembering her voice, her calm, the steady rhythm she had brought into his chaos. The next morning, Evelyn's shift started earlier than usual. She found a note waiting on her desk, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me what touch means. I will not forget. J.R." No request, no goodbye, only that. She folded the note carefully and placed it inside her notebook without a word. Days passed. Julian was discharged quietly. No cameras, no headlines, no public statement. But his absence echoed through the halls like a song that ended too soon. Evelyn continued her routine checking vitals, guiding patients, smiling when required, but every so often, she caught herself glancing at the empty room down the hall. One evening, as she prepared to leave, she noticed something on her workstation, a small white box with a ribbon tied neatly around it. Inside was a new metronome, sleek, silver, engraved with 4 words. "For when silence hurts." Evelyn sat down slowly, her eyes stinging. She wound the key and let the soft ticking fill the air again. For the first time in days, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Somewhere out there, she imagined Julian doing the same, listening to the same rhythm, 2 people breathing in sync, even when the world had placed them miles apart. And though neither of them could explain why, both understood that healing had not ended. It had only changed shape. 2 months passed after Julian's discharge. The rhythm of hospital life continued as if nothing had changed, but for Evelyn, everything had. Every night she passed by the therapy room, her eyes lingered for a second longer on the empty chair where he used to sit. Sometimes she caught herself adjusting the metronome on her desk, setting it to the same slow tempo he once breathed to. The sound steadied her heart, even if she would never admit it. Outside, autumn arrived quietly. The air turned crisp, and golden leaves gathered along the hospital steps. Evelyn had learned to live with the silence, or at least she convinced herself that she had. Then, one Friday morning, the silence broke. She was preparing for a session with a new group of patients when Dr. Harris, her supervisor, called her into his office. The blinds were half closed, and a faint smell of coffee filled the air. He held a printed letter in his hand. "Evelyn," he said, "I have an unusual request. Reed Biomedical has launched a new community outreach program. They want to partner with our rehabilitation wing. The project is called Open Hands. They ask specifically for you to lead the pilot." Her fingers tightened around her pen. "Reed Biomedical?" she repeated, her voice careful. Dr. Harris nodded. "Apparently, it is a new initiative focused on trauma recovery and ethical patient care. The founder said you inspired it." Evelyn froze. "Who signed the letter?" He looked down. Julian Reed. For a moment, she could not breathe. The name she had tried to bury for weeks now glowed at the top of the page in bold ink. Dr. Harris continued speaking about logistics and funding, but the words blurred into a distant hum. That evening, long after the other staff had left, she stood alone in the therapy room, the lights dim. On the table was the same silver metronome, ticking quietly. She traced the engraving with her finger for when silence hurts. Then she whispered to herself, "What are you doing, Julian?" The following Monday, a black sedan arrived at the hospital entrance. Evelyn was helping a patient adjust his brace when she saw the familiar figure step out. Julian looked different. The stiffness in his movements was gone, replaced by calm confidence. He was wearing a tailored suit, but his expression was not that of a distant CEO. It was of someone returning home. "Good morning, Miss Hart," he greeted her gently. "Mr. Reed," she replied, formal and steady. "Welcome back." They shook hands. His touch was warm, respectful. The same rhythm that once filled the therapy room now pulsed quietly in the space between them. Julian explained the program to the staff, how Open Hands would train medical teams nationwide to provide trauma-sensitive care. He spoke about the need for empathy, for consent, for dignity in every touch. His words carried weight, not because he was powerful, but because he had lived the experience himself. After the presentation, he approached Evelyn privately in the hallway. "I was hoping you would say yes," he said. "This program only works if you lead it." Evelyn folded her arms, studying him. "Why me, Julian? There are hundreds of therapists you could have chosen." "Because you changed the way I see people," he said simply. "And because I owe you the truth." He handed her a folder. Inside were photos from his foundation's work, clinics being renovated, nurses receiving grants, patients holding hands during group therapy. At the back of the folder was a note in his handwriting. "This started because one woman taught me that healing begins with permission." Her eyes lingered on the words. "You did not have to build an entire foundation to prove a point," she said softly. "Maybe not," he replied. "But I wanted to build something that lasts longer than regret." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken memories between them. Evelyn finally asked, "What do you expect from me, Julian?" He smiled faintly. "Just what you always gave me, honesty. If you say no, I will understand." Evelyn looked down at the metronome she still carried in her bag, then back at him. "All right," she said quietly. "I will do it. But this is work, Julian. Nothing more." "I know," he said, though the flicker in his eyes said otherwise. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side, training teams, writing protocols, visiting partner hospitals. Each meeting felt both familiar and foreign. They spoke like colleagues, but there was an undercurrent neither could deny. Sometimes, when she handed him a document or adjusted a display, their hands brushed briefly, and that old rhythm returned. Neither mentioned it, but both felt it. One evening, after a long day of training, they found themselves alone in the conference room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered notes. The city lights shimmered through the glass wall. Julian leaned against the window, his voice quiet. "You once told me healing starts when you stop fighting it," he said. "I think I finally understand what that means." Evelyn looked at him, tired but calm. "And what does it mean to you now?" He met her eyes. "It means letting go of fear, letting people in, even when you are afraid to lose them." She said nothing, only folded the last report into her folder. "Fear does not disappear, Julian. We just learn to live with it." As she turned to leave, he called her name once more. "Evelyn, thank you for giving me permission to live again." She paused at the door, her back to him. "Just remember," she said softly, "healing is not a debt you owe. It is a choice you keep making." "Oh." Then she walked out, leaving him in the quiet room, the echo of her footsteps blending with the sound of rain beginning to fall again outside. Julian looked at the droplets tracing down the glass and whispered to himself, "Then I will keep choosing it." Winter arrived with the kind of cold that settled deep into the bones, even inside the well-heated walls of the hospital. The Open Hands program had grown faster than anyone expected. Clinics across the state were requesting training, and reporters had begun writing about the movement that redefined patient care. But for Evelyn and Julian, success came with distance. They saw each other almost every day, yet they spoke less about themselves. Their conversations were professional, polite, wrapped in invisible boundaries neither dared to cross. Sometimes, while walking past his office, Evelyn heard his low voice through the door speaking to investors, donors, executives, and wondered if he ever felt the same ache she did after each meeting ended. One afternoon, Dr. Harris called her into the main conference room. Julian was already there, standing beside a screen showing the logo of Open Hands. Around the table sat hospital administrators and board members. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Julian began, "Reed Biomedical's next step is to establish a permanent training center here at Street Clare Hospital. It will require renovations to part of the rehabilitation wing. The board has agreed in principle, but the hospital's management must assign a clinical director to oversee it." He turned toward Evelyn. "And we would like that person to be you." For a moment, she could not find her voice. The offer was overwhelming, an opportunity she had never imagined. But before she could speak, one of the board members interrupted. "Mr. Reed, is it appropriate to place a therapist with only 10 years of experience in charge of a multi-million-dollar project? We must consider reputation." The words stung, though Evelyn kept her face composed. Julian's expression darkened. "Experience is not only measured in years," he said calmly. "It is measured in impact, and Miss Hart's impact is why we are all here." The room fell silent. The board member looked uneasy but said nothing more. Evelyn sat quietly, her heart caught between gratitude and discomfort. She appreciated Julian's defense, yet she also knew how it looked like favoritism. After the meeting, she found him waiting by the elevators. "You should not have spoken for me," she said softly. "I did not speak for you," he replied. "I spoke the truth." "People will not see it that way," she said. "They will see a powerful man defending a woman who once treated him. They will question everything I have earned." Julian exhaled slowly. "Then let them question me instead." Evelyn looked at him, her voice trembling. "That is not how integrity works, Julian. You cannot shield me from the world. I have to stand on my own." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then do it. Take the position. Prove them wrong." Her breath caught. "You think it is that easy?" "No," he said quietly. "But I think you are strong enough to do it." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside without another word. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Weeks passed. Renovations began, and Evelyn threw herself into work. The new facility started to take shape: bright rooms, soft lighting, private therapy spaces designed around dignity and trust. Yet even as the project grew, she avoided Julian whenever possible. One evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, she stayed behind to finalize reports. The lights in the hallway flickered slightly from the winter storm outside. She was gathering her papers when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You still work too late," Julian said, stepping inside the room. He looked tired, his tie loosened, snowflakes clinging to his coat. Evelyn did not look up. "It keeps me busy." He walked closer, his tone gentle. "You built this program from the ground up, Evelyn. Do you know how proud I am of you?" She froze at the sound of her name. "Pride does not erase the distance between us," she said quietly. "I never wanted distance," he admitted. "I only wanted to respect the lines you drew." Her eyes met his. Sometimes respect feels a lot like fear. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "Do you remember this?" He placed the old metronome on the table, the silver one he had sent her months ago. It was still engraved with the same words. "For when silence hurts." Evelyn looked at it, her voice barely above a whisper. "You kept it." "I did," he said, "because the silence still hurts." She swallowed hard, her composure breaking for the first time. "Julian, we cannot go back. Too much has changed." He nodded slowly. "You are right. We cannot go back. But maybe we do not have to. Maybe healing means moving forward together, differently. The ticking of the metronome filled the quiet room, soft and steady. Evelyn took a slow breath, her hand brushing the cool metal surface. For the first time in months, she did not pull away. "Tell me something," she said after a long pause. "If I take the director position, will you promise to treat me as your equal?" Julian's voice was firm. "Evelyn, I have never seen you as anything less." The metronome ticked between them, marking the moment with perfect rhythm. Outside, snow began to fall heavier, covering the city in a quiet white glow. Inside the hospital, two people stood a few feet apart, the air charged not with tension, but with something gentler acceptance. For the first time, Evelyn felt the distance between them start to fade, not because of pity or gratitude, but because they had both learned the same lesson. Healing is not about erasing pain. It is about finding someone who understands how to hold it with care. The metronome kept ticking, steady and sure, as if reminding them that time, like love, only matters when it keeps moving forward. Spring arrived early that year. The last traces of snow melted from the hospital roof, replaced by sunlight that slipped through the glass walls of the new rehabilitation wing. The Open Hands Center had officially opened its doors, and for the first time, the corridors felt alive again. Patients laughed softly in the waiting area. Therapists moved with calm confidence. The scent of chamomile lotion, Evelyn's signature, lingered in every room. As the new clinical director, Evelyn's days were longer than ever. She arrived before dawn and left long after sunset, walking the same halls she once worked in as a night shift therapist. Now, every decision carried weight. People looked to her for guidance, for leadership. She carried that responsibility with quiet strength, though she sometimes caught herself missing the simplicity of her old routines, the metronome, the one-on-one connection, the steady rhythm of healing one person at a time. Julian visited the center often, but always with purpose. Board meetings, media interviews, donor tours, his world was faster, louder, and heavier than before. Yet whenever he crossed paths with Evelyn, the noise seemed to fade. They would exchange polite smiles, brief updates, and nothing more. Still, every glance carried the same unspoken question neither dared to voice. What are we now? One afternoon, while Evelyn was reviewing patient progress reports, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian's assistant. "Emergency meeting at 3 p.m. Urgent." By the time she entered the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Dr. Harris sat at one end of the table, and several board members were already speaking in hushed voices. Julian stood near the window, his posture rigid. Evelyn asked, "What happened?" Dr. Harris looked at her gravely. "There has been an internal complaint. An anonymous staff member suggested that your appointment as director was influenced by Mr. Reed's personal connection to you." The words hit her like a wave of cold water. She opened her mouth to speak, but Julian stepped forward first. "That accusation is false," he said firmly. "Every decision went through standard approval procedures." One of the board members frowned. "Still, perception matters. If the media finds out, this could damage the credibility of both the hospital and the foundation." Evelyn sat perfectly still, her heart pounding. "You think my work is not enough to speak for itself?" "No one said that," another member replied carefully. "But given your history with Mr. Reed, some might assume favoritism." And, Julian's voice grew sharp. "Then let them assume. The results are undeniable." Evelyn turned toward him. "Julian, stop. Defending me again will only make it worse." He fell silent. The room stayed quiet for a moment, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, steady, relentless, like the old metronome between them. Evelyn finally stood. "If my position threatens the integrity of this project, I will step down." Julian's expression hardened. "No, you will not resign because of gossip." "I will not let your name be dragged through scandal," she said firmly. "And I will not let the staff think I am here because of you. I worked too hard for this, Julian. I cannot let it be questioned." She gathered her papers and left before anyone could stop her. Outside, rain had started to fall, the kind that smelled like renewal but felt like sorrow. She walked to the small garden behind the hospital, the same place where patients practiced breathing exercises. Her reflection shimmered faintly in a puddle near her feet. For a long time, she just stood there, letting the rain soak her hair, her clothes, her resolve. Julian found her there half an hour later. He held an umbrella over her, his voice quiet. "You should not be out here." She looked up. You cannot fix this, Julian. I am not trying to fix it, he said. I am trying to stand beside you. Evelyn shook her head. That is the problem. Every time you stand beside me, the world assumes I cannot stand on my own. He hesitated, rain sliding down the edge of the umbrella. Then tell me what to do. Let me face this, she said. Alone. Her voice did not waver, and for once, he did not argue. He handed her the umbrella and stepped back into the rain without it. Then I will be here when you are ready, he said quietly. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn faced the investigation with composure. She provided records, testimonials, documentation proof that every decision had been earned. Her professionalism impressed even her skeptics. In the end, the complaint was dismissed. The board issued a formal apology, and her leadership was reaffirmed publicly. When the announcement was made, Evelyn sat alone in her office, staring at the letter that cleared her name. Relief washed through her, but so did exhaustion. There was no triumph in being proven right, only the quiet ache of everything she had endured to stay honest. That evening, a knock sounded on her door. Julian stood there, holding a small white envelope. I wanted you to see this, he said. Inside was a check, his personal donation to expand the center's outreach program. At the bottom, instead of his signature, were 4 simple words. In honor of Evelyn Hart. She looked at him, unsure whether to speak or cry. You did not have to do that. I did, he said softly. Because you reminded everyone, including me, that integrity does not need protection. It only needs proof. Evelyn folded the check carefully and set it aside. So what happens now? Julian smiled faintly. Now, the work continues. The world keeps spinning, and maybe, if you allow it, we start again. No secrets, no misunderstandings. Her gaze softened. Starting again does not erase what happened. I do not want to erase it, he said. I just want to build something real from it. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice steady but gentle. Then we start with this honesty and space to grow. Julian nodded. That is all I ever wanted. They stood there in the quiet, the air between them finally free of fear and doubt. The metronome on her desk ticked softly in the background, its rhythm steady and sure, reminding them both that healing was not a single moment, but a promise renewed with every breath they chose to take. Weeks passed after the investigation ended, and the air inside the Open Hands Center grew lighter. The staff no longer whispered in hallways, and the patients returned to smiling when Evelyn entered a room. She carried herself with quiet confidence now, not from pride, but from peace. Her nameplate on the office door no longer felt borrowed. It belonged there. Julian kept his promise to give her space, but their paths continued to cross. Some days it was a shared elevator ride. Other times, a brief meeting about funding or schedules. Every conversation stayed professional, but beneath the surface, something gentle lingered, an understanding that neither of them needed to define just yet. One evening, after the last training session ended, Evelyn found herself walking through the nearly empty corridors. The sunset reflected off the polished floors, turning everything gold. As she passed the therapy room, she heard faint music. When she opened the door, she saw Julian sitting at the piano in the corner, the same piano the hospital used for relaxation therapy. He looked up, surprised but smiling. I did not know anyone was still here. Evelyn stepped inside. I could say the same about you. He chuckled softly. Old habits. I used to play when I could not sleep. She leaned against the doorframe. That must be often. Lately, less, he said. The noise in my head is quieter than it used to be. For a moment, neither spoke. The melody he played was slow and careful, like someone learning to trust his hands again. The sound filled the room with calm. Evelyn watched him, her voice soft. You have gotten better. He smiled faintly, maybe because I had a good teacher. She tilted her head. I do not remember teaching you music. You did not, he said. You just taught me to listen. The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. She walked closer, resting her hand lightly on the piano's edge. So, this is how you listen now? He nodded. To rhythm, to silence, to people. He paused, looking at her. To you. Her breath hitched, but she held his gaze. Julian, what happens if we open this door again? We already know what the world can do with stories like ours. He stopped playing. The echo of the last note lingered between them. Then we tell our own story before anyone else can write it for us. Evelyn looked down at the piano keys, her reflection mirrored in the black lacquer. You make it sound simple. "It is not," he said quietly. "But nothing worth rebuilding ever is." She thought for a long moment. Outside, thunder rolled far away, but inside, the only sound was the steady ticking of the metronome on a nearby shelf, still keeping time. Finally, she said, "If we try again, it has to be honest this time. No secrets, no shields, just who we are." Julian's voice was steady. "That is exactly what I want." She hesitated, then sat down beside him on the piano bench. For the first time in months, their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. He began to play again, a slow, deliberate tune, and she matched her breathing to the rhythm. When the song ended, he turned to her. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded. He reached for her hand, the touch gentle, deliberate, and full of meaning. This time, she did not flinch. Evelyn smiled, faint but real. "You remembered to ask." Julian smiled back. "I will never forget." The clock in the hallway struck 8. The lights dimmed automatically, bathing the room in warm shadows. They sat there in silence, fingers intertwined, two hearts finally finding the same tempo after a long and uneven song. Neither of them spoke again, because some moments did not need words. The metronome ticked on, steady as a heartbeat, marking the beginning of something they both finally believed in, love that healed. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. The weeks that followed were quiet but full. For the first time in a long while, life at the Open Hands Center felt balanced. Evelyn and Julian found a rhythm that neither of them had to force. Their connection grew naturally through shared laughter, small silences, and moments that no longer needed explanation. They did not hide what was happening, but they did not announce it either. The staff noticed subtle things, the way Julian's eyes softened when Evelyn entered a room, or how she smiled more easily when he was near. Their relationship was built not on grand gestures, but on trust rebuilt piece by piece. One morning, Julian invited Evelyn to accompany him to a charity event in the city. It was a fundraiser for the foundation's new expansion program. She hesitated at first, knowing that being seen together publicly would draw attention, but he simply said, "This is not about headlines. It is about showing the world what compassion looks like when it leads." In the evening of the event, the ballroom glittered with soft light and the quiet hum of conversation. Guests moved gracefully between tables, and a string quartet played near the stage. When Evelyn entered in a simple navy dress, the room seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Julian met her at the entrance, his expression calm but full of pride. "You look beautiful," he said softly. "Do not say that too loudly," she replied with a small smile. "Someone might accuse you of favoritism again." "And well," he chuckled under his breath. "Let them. Tonight, I am just grateful you are here." As the event began, speakers talked about the progress of Open Hands and the number of patients whose lives had been changed. When it was Julian's turn to speak, he stepped onto the stage with quiet confidence. He spoke not as a CEO, but as a man who understood healing from the inside out. "Kindness," he said, "is not weakness. It is courage disguised as gentleness. And real leadership is not about control, it is about respect." Evelyn watched from her seat, her eyes glistening with pride. Every word he spoke echoed the lessons they had learned together, the power of permission, the dignity in touch, the strength in vulnerability. Then Julian surprised everyone. He called Evelyn to the stage. The room murmured softly as she walked up, unsure of what he intended. When she reached him, he turned to the audience. "This woman," he said, "taught me that healing begins the moment we choose honesty over fear. Every part of this foundation, every life we touch, carries her fingerprint." The applause began softly, then grew until the entire room stood. Evelyn's heart pounded as she turned to him. "Julian," she whispered, "you did not have to do that." "I know," he said quietly, "but I wanted to." "I know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver metronome, the same one that had followed their story from the beginning. He set it gently on the podium, letting its soft ticking fill the silence. "This sound," he said to the audience, "reminds me that time is not measured by seconds, but by moments when we choose to care." He looked back at Evelyn. "For me, every second of healing began with her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she stood tall, holding his gaze. The applause returned, but she barely heard it. In that instant, she saw the man she had once met in a hospital room, a patient lost between pain and pride, now standing as someone whole. After the event, They stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. Julian turned to her and said, "That was the truth, Evelyn. No script, no show, just truth." She smiled softly. "Then maybe the truth is enough." End of. He reached for her hand, and this time there was no hesitation. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if the world had finally caught up with them. Above them, the city hummed quietly. Somewhere, a clock struck 10. The night was ordinary, but in that small, simple moment, it felt extraordinary because it was real, and because it was theirs. A year later, the Open Hands Center had become a model for hospitals across the country. What started as one wing in Street, Clare Hospital had grown into a movement, a promise that healing would always begin with respect. Evelyn's name appeared in journals, panels, and training programs, but she remained the same calm presence she had always been. Every morning, she still began her day with the soft ticking of a metronome, a sound that reminded her to breathe before the rush began. Julian divided his time between the foundation and the hospital, but he never missed a Friday at the center. Those afternoons had quietly become theirs. Sometimes they discussed projects. Sometimes they sat in silence in the garden behind the building, watching new patients learn to walk again. Their lives no longer needed grand declarations. The work they shared had already said everything. One evening, as the sun began to set, Julian waited for her in the therapy room where it had all started. The lights were low, the air faintly scented with chamomile. On the table sat the silver metronome, polished and still. When Evelyn entered, he smiled. "You kept the room the same," she said softly. "I wanted to remember where everything began," he replied. "Do you still listen to it?" "Every day," she said. "It helps me stay grounded." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Then maybe it is time for a new rhythm." Evelyn frowned slightly, confused, until he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, and shining under the faint light. "Evelyn Hart," he said quietly, "you once told me that healing is a choice we keep making. I have chosen it every day since the moment you walked into my hospital room. Will you keep choosing it with me?" Her breath caught. Tears welled, but her smile was steady. "Julian Reed," she whispered. "You remembered to ask." He laughed softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised I always would." "Ugh." She nodded and held out her hand. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch deliberate and reverent. The metronome began to tick again, its steady rhythm filling the room like a heartbeat. Evelyn looked down at the ring, then back at him. "This is not an ending," she said. "It is just another beginning." Julian smiled, his eyes warm. "Then let us begin." Outside, the evening light poured through the windows, painting the walls in gold. The world beyond the glass kept moving, cars passing, leaves rustling, life continuing. But in that room, time slowed to the rhythm of two hearts that had learned, after everything, how to touch without fear. The metronome ticked softly, each beat a quiet promise. To keep breathing, to keep believing, to keep choosing love.